Test tubes are a must-have for every ant keeper. Whether you're just starting out or have dozens of established colonies, the humble test tube has firmly established itself as a key tool for being a successful ant keeper. However, it is not without its pitfalls. Feeding and moving colonies is tricky inside a test tube, especially when you don't have a second set of hands to help you. Here is everything you need to know about using test tubes for your queen ant or colony. Hey guys, welcome to another episode of The Ant Keeper, where I upload every week about all things ant related. If you find yourself enjoying this video, please subscribe. It really helps me out and I really appreciate it. Test tube setups are the choice by most for starting in ant keeping, simply because they work. They closely resemble the natural founding design a queen ant digs out in the wild. Replicating the founding chamber so closely, the queen ant instinctively goes straight to work and can start laying straight after being put inside the test tube. Often when I've caught elates, they start laying in less than an hour after being housed inside the test tube setup. I have already covered on how to make a test tube setup in my video, How to Raise a Queen Ant. I'll leave that link in the description below. Here are 3 more tips on making a test tube setup even better. First, wash your hands well with warm soapy water before touching the test tube or the cotton. If you make the test tube dirty or the cotton dirty with your hands, mold growth will likely become established early on. This will require you to have to move the ants to a new test tube sooner than what's necessary. Next, use the cleanest water you have available. Distilled or bottled water is ideal. Can you see a theme here? Hygiene is critically important when putting together your test tube setup. Mold growth is no joke. I almost lost my first colony because of it, but with good preparation this can be avoided. This next tip is more of an aesthetic tip. If you push the cotton down vertically and then quickly jolt the cotton down just before it touches the water, you won't get a bubble. It's not critical to the well-being of your queen ant, but I think it looks nice. Lastly, here is a bonus tip. Ensure you use a big enough piece of cotton as a blocker for the water. I once made a temporary setup whilst on a hike for a queen ant that I found, and the queen ant burrowed through the cotton piece and caused flooding in the chamber, which nearly killed her. Luckily, I checked on her a short while later and transferred her into a spare vial instead. So how much cotton is enough? Well, there isn't really a rule. It sort of depends on the size of your test tube. I aim for roughly the width of my thumb. If you put more cotton than that, I think it's wasted space, which could otherwise be used for more water or space for when the workers arrive. And any smaller than that really does potentially risk flooding. When cleaning your test tubes, use hot soapy water. I wash mine out 3 to 5 times, ensuring any bacteria has been killed and removed. I then air dry them upside down by a window. Using tissues or paper towels leaves tiny fibers on the inside, making viewing the ants not as pleasant compared to air drying. After they have dried, I visually inspect the tubes, looking for anything I may have missed in the cleaning process. Also, when inspecting and handling the tube, try to avoid touching the barrel or the sides of the tube. Rather, hold it by the bottom and the top. This way you won't get fingerprints all over your newly cleaned tube. When using your test tubes, you may notice that they have a tendency to roll around, being round and all, you know? If the test tube rolls, this will stress the ants out. To avoid this, you can either buy test tubes from places like Ants Canada that have these neat little nodules around the circumference, preventing them from rolling, which I think is a fantastic idea. An effective alternative, if you can't get a hold of those, is to use a flattened piece of cotton on one side like this. It's not a perfect solution, but it does work. In my last video, I covered everything about feeding and maintaining your queen ants in colonies. I even explained how to move your ants from one tube to another without stressing or interfering the ants inside. If you feel like binging on ant videos, then you have to check that one out. I'll leave that video in the description below. Here's a tip when feeding a colony on your own. Have you ever tried to open a test tube that's full of workers? You may be like me and you need to psych yourself up before trying to feed your small colony without maybe losing a worker. You know when you open the test tube, you pull the cotton away and all the workers try and flood out, and you think, no, I don't want to lose a worker. Well, fear no more. I have a solution. If you get a piece of cotton and you make a hole with your tweezers through it, the cotton will become like an emergency blocker, preventing any workers from escaping. If a worker tries to escape whilst you have your tweezers inside the tube, you can simply seal it with the cotton that's around the tweezers. Then just wait for the workers to leave the edge of the tube and quickly replace the cotton back on. I've noticed if this does happen, the workers will become distracted by the new food source, giving you ample time to swap the cotton. As I mentioned earlier, test tube setups do have their limitations. There comes a time when the colony outgrows the founding chamber and requires to be moved into a formicarium, outworld or nest. Also, over time, the test tube can become difficult to see out of. This is why I recommend using glass test tubes wherever possible. They're better in my opinion because they reflect light better. It takes longer to go cloudy, and glass tubes refract light better, meaning when you shine a light at the tube, you can see with more clarity when compared to a plastic test tube. They're also easier to clean. If a plastic test tube gets cloudy from a buildup of waste products, it takes longer to clean compared to a glass test tube. And whilst we're on the subject, I prefer 20mm test tubes over 16mm test tubes. I think the more space you have, the easier all the tasks are that you do when you're looking after your ants. For example, you can fit more water inside a 20mm test tube, meaning you have to swap the ants into another test tube less often. Also, having more space means you can have more workers in before you have to move them into a formicarium. If you made it this far, please subscribe if you haven't already. It makes my day. I love seeing more people joining in on the ant keeping community. I'd love to know from you. Do you have any extra tips or tricks that I didn't mention in this video? Write them in the description below to help out our new ant keepers. If you're a new ant keeper and still have more questions, you can ask them in the comment section below, or you can direct message me on Instagram, and I'll walk you through any questions you might have. Thank you guys, and I'll see you on the next video. Until then, happy ant keeping.